I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of More Than Kurosawa. And this week we're going to be looking at our first Indonesian filmmaker from the great Usmar Ismail, discuss a little bit about Indonesian film and why I think this is one of the most underseen movies we covered on this series, but one of the best that we've covered for sure. I'm talking about 1954's After the Curfew. But if you're new to the series, what I do every single week is talk about a different Asian movie by a different Asian director. We spend the first part of the video talking about that director, why I want to cover them, why this is maybe a good starting point to discover some more of their other movies and why it's one of their best. And then the second half of the video discussing the movie itself. The point ultimately being to get a better understanding of Asian cinema, the wide world of Asian cinema, that there is more than just Kurosawa or Bong Joon-ho or some of the more well-known Asian directors, that there's a whole world out there from so many different countries. This week we're covering our first Indonesian director, but we've covered directors from China and Japan and Vietnam, and really want to expand that in the later parts of this series, because there's not only just the Japanese film industry or the Chinese film industry. There is a lot of great directors all throughout many different decades. We've covered movies from the 2010s all the way now here to the 50s, and we want to continue kind of showcasing the history of Asian cinema on this channel, and hopefully give you some opportunity to check out some really cool, awesome Asian movies. But without further ado, let's jump into things talking about the filmmaker himself, Usmar Ismail. The reason why I want to cover him on this channel, I mentioned at the top, is because we have yet to cover an Indonesian director, and I felt like that was an important part of, if you're talking about East Asian cinema, you want to cover multiple different countries and their movie industry. Now, it's not as big as an industry like something like Japan, and After the Curfew is actually a really significant movie for that reason. It was the first Indonesian movie that was shown internationally. Usmar Ismail is a really kind of pioneering figure within the Indonesian film industry, but similar to what we talked about a couple of weeks ago with Dang Nhat Min and the Vietnamese film industry, Indonesia, in the kind of early 20th century went through a lot of political and upheaval, being kind of occupied there by the Dutch, and then World War II happens, and there's the Japanese, and then they kind of get their own independence. And because it wasn't as well funded as some other countries' film programs, a lot of movies from that period were destroyed or disappeared somehow, or were just in terrible shape because they weren't stored properly. So the history of Indonesian film is a little bit spotty. That being said, when you take a look at a movie like this, you really see the promise of it. And while it does have a pretty strong film industry nowadays, I wanted to take a look at a historically important one to the history of Indonesian cinema. And this was a filmmaker, Usmar Ismail, that I really knew nothing about going into this series. Similar to someone like a Dang Nhat Min, just trying to learn more about the different cinema and ultimately share that with you guys. And I found him through Martin Scorsese and his World Cinema Project and his collaboration that he did with the Criterion Collection, where he often has these kind of volumes of movies, underseen movies, restores them through the World Cinema Project in very high quality transfers, and then Criterion is able to distribute them. I actually saw it on the Criterion channel, the streaming service, one of the best streaming services out there, and was really blown away and thought that if Usmar Ismail, his first movie I saw was After the Curfew, and I thought if he made After the Curfew, he's probably a great director with many other great movies. Let's talk about him. Let's talk about this movie. Worthwhile. So you have kind of my desire to want to cover Indonesian filmmaker. You have the importance of this as an Indonesian movie in general. Then you kind of have that seal of approval by Martin Scorsese and his kind of weight in terms of making some of these movies a little bit more readily accessible and available. But speaking of Ismail himself as a filmmaker, I've seen a couple of other of his movies. Not all of his movies are really easily accessible, but I saw Three Maidens and I saw Girls' Dormitory, and just picking up some of his stylistic tendencies throughout his career, what I found is that he's less interested in visual style. He's pretty standard in how he blocks scenes and how he uses the camera. Of course, you're talking about, the 50s into the 60s, so there's not, steady cam and all this different kind of technology that we have now. So he is very much of the Hollywood style of filmmakers like a John Ford or a William Wyler in their kind of stable, traditional way of using the camera. But what I think he is interested in is his kind of use of film as a social means and to tackle social issues that are going on at the time. And some of those themes being more universal. Oftentimes the kind of similarities between those three movies that I have seen are the young people oftentimes trying to figure out their life and their romantic relationships and the pressures that they put on in terms of expectations from their parents and the intergenerational kind of dynamics that are going on. After the Curfew, in a movie like The Long March, from my understanding, are a little bit more, of course, war-centric and maybe socially minded, whereas the other ones are a little bit more familial focused. But I was surprised at really how all of his movies felt modern in their themes. And I think he really just has a deft touch at defining his characters and giving them their own understanding and motivation. You don't feel like anyone is a caricature of a certain stereotype. They all feel real with their own kind of perspectives on life. You kind of understand everyone in that kind of intergenerational desires for what they want for their kids and what people want and struggles with relationships and all that good stuff. So anytime you can watch a Indonesian movie from the 50s that is easy to understand and empathize with the characters, I think is a strong sign that it's a movie that has stood the test of time and feels modern, which was really what surprised me about a lot of Ismail's movies. However, the main reason why I wanted to cover Ismail was because of this movie, After the Curfew. So transitioning now into the discussion of this film, this is about an ex-freedom fighter who fought for Indonesians' independence, kind of in the post-World War II period there in Indonesia. And the war is over, the revolution is over, and now he's trying to get a job and start his life. And he has to deal with kind of the woman in his life who waited for him during the war, who is ready to get married, and he has to worry about that and feel like he's trying to process the war and some of the PTSD, even though it wasn't directly called that at the time, that he's dealing with. And he's also trying to get a job and understand this new role that seemingly has passed him by. The quickest sell of the movie would be that it is the Indonesian best years of our lives. If you've seen that film, the 46 William Wyler movie, which is one of the best movies I've ever seen, I think. Just a really smart, humanist World War II drama, but on the American side. And this movie, like I said, is similar in that it has a main protagonist trying to deal with kind of post-war life, the trauma from that experience, interacting with some of his old war buddies and seeing where they are. But the fascinating, kind of interesting bend to this movie is that it is in, of course, not America, in Indonesia, but it's not necessarily post-war, it's post-revolution. So it's not going to a country that wasn't at war, that kind of went on without them. It's more so going back to a country that is new. And we start to see, I think Ismail has a pretty cynical take on the way revolutions can have these kind of grand ideas, but quickly succumb to some of the follies of human greed and corruption. And unlike Best Years of Our Lives, it really is a story told through the perspective of a main character, in this case played by A.N. Alkaf, and I thought he did a tremendous job. This was one of the best finds of an actor, of a performance that we've found in this series. So much of the movie is placed upon him, and all the kind of feelings that you want to feel have to be through his character. That kind of struggle that you see on his face with the PTSD of some of the acts that he committed, of the guilt that he has through not advancing or giving enough time to this woman that he loves. He's trying to figure out his own life and the frustration that comes with that. So that kind of mixture of frustration and guilt and then jealousy when he sees some of his old war buddies and what they've done and some of the disillusionment that he has. So there's a lot being placed upon him, and he's able to control that and handle that expertly. And what he does is use a performance style that has this bottled up nervous energy. so that it's all kind of coming through on his face, less so with kind of his body movements. But we see him, when he gets a new job and then maybe messes up at the job, or is in a scenario where he's meeting with an old wartime buddy and he realizes what his buddy did to get himself rich, and the weird ways that he was able to do that without spoiling anything. You see this kind of nervous, bottled up energy, and he's about to explode, but in these scenes you feel the tension just through his face, and his performance style is just fascinating to look at, because he's got this really strong, clear, kind of intense nervous energy, but it's all bottled in. It's only kind of barely breaking through. And the performance style really reminded me of someone like a Brando at this time, where Brando was so important in the movies in say like the 50s and 60s, because he was very internal and had a completely different performance style. Because before then, a lot of the actors were coming from theater, and they were trained that way to be a little bit more broad and over the top. And a movie like Best Years of Our Lives actually works in one part because Harold Russell, is not an actor, so he keeps it a little bit more naturalistic. The same way here with Alkaff, I think. Even though he may have had theater training, he feels much more closer to a Brando or a Spencer Tracy than he does a Cary Grant in that time. And it really works well for this movie. Being reserved, being internal, waiting for him to explode, just makes him a compelling, interesting visual style of acting. You're constantly kind of engaged and wanting to see what he does next. But it's also, I think, an effective tool to make you deeply empathize with him as a character, as someone who is going through almost a mini mental breakdown as he kind of gets kicked in the face by a job, by a girl, by his old war buddies, kind of time and time again, as he quickly becomes disillusioned with this new world that he thought he was coming into that has maybe seemingly left him behind. So Alkaff is so perfectly tuned for this movie because he has this very contemporary performance style mixed with the very contemporary themes of the movie, of someone, a young adult who's dealing with some of his own trauma and personal mental health battles, while also trying to start his life and be internal and figure his own stuff out, but also try to not put that upon anyone else. It's a very resonant theme that will resonate for a lot of you out there. So if you're interested in looking for a socially minded humanist drama about a very unique period in Indonesian history, but I think in just world history, with one of the best performances I've seen in a long time by A.N. Alkaff. I think if you have something like the Criterion Channel streaming service, or if you don't, sign up. If anything, just to watch this movie or some of the other movies we've covered on this series, it's definitely a really amazing find that I really enjoyed, and a really humanist, contemporary, modern Indonesian movie from the 50s. That's just another classic example that when it comes to Asian cinema, there is more than Kurosawa. But that's about it, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below. Let me know if you've seen this movie, if you're interested in checking it out. Like I said, it's got that Scorsese seal of approval, so if you don't trust me, maybe you trust him. And as always, subscribe to the channel, but these videos come out usually Monday, 12 p.m. Eastern Time. We've been pretty good at hitting that mark, so you know when they're going to be coming out. And then we've only got a few more of these left, about a month or so before we get into the Oscar season, and the fall film festivals are starting back up, so that will be exciting. But we're still rolling along with more than Kurosawa at this time. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.